Noah is their child. I think that the older I grow, I keep growing older and harder of hearing, the more I feel that young people are the solution rather than the problem. But that what we need is what we have lacked, particularly in the United States, the connection of elders with youngsters, of oldsters with youngsters. And that's what sparked the new visionary organizing in Detroit, that we looked at the young people as a solution to the crisis in the city, and then the elders came forward and worked with them to create gardens, because they knew that we needed to have another use for our vacant land, and they also knew that young people needed a mentality and an attitude toward life that was much more patient than the quick fix mentality that you acquire in the city.
Paulo Freire has a quote where he says, "The revolution is inherently an educational process." And Grace has spent a lot of time thinking both about how we think about political organizing as a part of our educational process, that we're all works in progress. But she's also spent a lot of time thinking about our educational system that involves, of course, people of all ages, but particularly young people going through the K through 12 system. So Grace, could you say a little more, because the Bay Area people have been so much at the forefront of trying to direct resources away from a system of incarceration and repression and towards a system of education and nurturing. But you also feel that that's not enough. It's not enough to demand more funding for education. It's not enough to demand lower tuition fees in the UC system, that we need more of a vision of education. So maybe you could say more about that.
Well, one of the chapters in the book, and I really urge people to take it seriously, is called Toward a Paradigm Shift in Education. I think Asian Americans are in danger. They are excelling in the present system. That means you've become part of the system. And I think, for us particularly, to understand that success in the school system means success in the larger system. It means becoming part of the 1%. And we have to face that challenge, to understand that when you succeed, you also begin embodying a new contradiction, and that you have to accept that challenge.
And that means we need more than access to education. It means we need a curriculum that's rooted in the community, that's about exposing children at a young age to the struggles around the environment, the struggles around rebuilding our communities, around resolving our conflicts peacefully, rather than relying on either violent conflict resolution amongst our own youth, or needing to call in the state to come in and impose violent solutions or lack thereof when crises erupt. So these are the things that Grace has been thinking about, really, again, all the way going back to making the shift between going beyond the rebellions of the 60s towards creating new models of how we're going to think and learn and live together.
I think one of the things we have to do is to change our image of the relationship between the teacher and the student. The vertical relationship between the teacher and the student was created at a time when there was no radio, let alone TV and the internet. And there wasn't information readily accessible to the young people. Since that time, in a book called The Disappearance of Childhood, the child receives from TV the same sense of crisis that the adult receives. And if we don't recognize that and give the child the opportunity to exercise his creative or her creative energies in relationship to solving these problems, all we're doing is making the school a pipeline to prisons. We are forcing the kids to drop out and to end up, as so many of them do, in the prison.
So this is actually a good segue to, we're going to go to the protests to visionary organizing. Keep going. I had some pictures of Detroit and Detroit summer, but I wanted to get to this one issue that you've been mentioning this a lot, and it's also in your book. You've been mentioning this a lot, and it's also in your book, how you talk about how we need to move away from protest organizing to visionary organizing. And I don't think people fully understand what that means, and I think that what I know what you're not saying to stop protesting, but you're saying to really go beyond and go deeper. And I think the question is, how do we move from being victims to visionary, to think about the difference between rebellion and revolution? Because for a lot of the people that we work with in our communities, right now we have a campaign where we want to tax the millionaires, right? Or we're fighting wage theft. Or we have housing fights that are happening all across the city. But these are the immediate and short-term fights, because even if you tax the millionaires, it doesn't really change the entire system, right? And so I think it would be helpful for you to talk a little more about this. And I just picked out these two pictures because it's in your book. These are pictures of you protesting in the 80s, fun times. And this one is, I think this must be in Philly against the casinos, no? Detroit casinos. And then this was just an Occupy Education action we had just 2 days ago. And this was with what Nomi was talking about with the Progressive Worker Alliance, which is a multiracial alliance of worker centers. And so it would be good if you could talk a little bit about just going beyond protests.
I don't know whether folks have thought about the difference between protest organizing and visionary organizing. I think we really seriously have to talk about it and think about it today, because protest organizing paid off to a certain degree during the period when the United States had an empire that was working. We are now living in the period of the dying empire, and the government and the corporations do not essentially have the resources to pay us off when we protest. The globalization, the corporations are investing in China and elsewhere, and the government is spending the money in Afghanistan and in the Middle East that we would ordinarily have expected them to pay out to us when we protested. But we always have to look at how we organize in the light of what time it is on the clock of the world. What works in a period when the United States is successful will not work in a period when the United States is failing. And that's what's doing now.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that one of Grace's favorite quotes from her husband, James Boggs, is "Don't think like a minority." And we know in cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles and states like California, people of color are already the majority, and people of color are becoming the majority. So we really need to go beyond the demand that somehow the majority owes us something, or the majority which has oppressed us or created these injustices has to give us our fair share. The reality is we are the new majority, and how we think of the we can mean a lot of different things. But the reality is we're moving beyond the stage of demanding rights or demanding some kind of redress from the majority. And Grace is also talking about the fact that the empire in many ways is in chaos, and the institutions all around us, from the legal system to the courts to the financial system, exhibit this chaos. It doesn't take much of an investigation to see that. And so again, we need to realize that these systems are in crisis, and so they're not going to be able to resolve this crisis themselves. And so it's upon us to create new systems of economy and work and ecology and thinking about relations of creating more equity in terms of race and gender and sexuality. These are the things that we're going to have to create ourselves rather than expect the courts or the political system or the capitalist system to somehow reform them.
How many people know the phrase, the radical revolution of values from Martin Luther King's 1967 anti-Vietnam War speech? It says we must struggle not only against racism, but against materialism and militarism. We have got to live more simply so that others can simply live, including ourselves. We have to reject materialism and consumerism. That's not something that's just idealistic anymore. That's life and death for all of us.
So this is my last question, because we want to make sure there's time for the book signing. And I wanted to end on this quote, because a lot of what Grace talks about is the dehumanizing effect in the United States and also in this world. And I wanted to just give a quote that came out of some of our worker leaders that work in the restaurants. And what they have said, and this is a quote that I always remember, is that being a dog would be better than being a worker in the United States. And the reason why that sticks with me so much is because it isn't about just fighting for better conditions and better wages, more wages. It is actually about how do we reach a society that work is fulfilling and that people are treated with dignity and as human beings. And I think for me, as a younger person, thinking about committing 70 years plus to this struggle, I think it takes some very deep compassion, and it takes a deep commitment to change ourselves, transform with that kind of humility. And I wanted to just have this last question for you to just to respond to, is that really what keeps you going? And if you could even say if you have any hobbies, any vices.
Two cans of beer per day.
Jeremy Lin, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
I grew up in my father's restaurants. I was born in one of them. And many of the workers in the restaurant were there illegally. And they used to be terrified when the immigration officials would show up, because so many of them were there on false pretenses. I hope that one of the things that we as Asian Americans can do particularly is make clear how much we have to contribute to the growth of the human spirit, to the growth of all our souls, and how much immigrants do that, and to use our dangerous, say this very often, as a means to advance the cause of the whole country. To think more generously, more responsibly about how we are now one world.
So Grace, I'm going to follow up on Alex's question, because you've lived in the same little apartment on the east side of Detroit. The house next door to you has now burned down. The house across the street has been foreclosed, vacant. There was even, a terrible attack there that was on the news. The others across the street have gone into foreclosure. And And obviously the neighborhood is nothing like the Detroit that you moved to in the 1950s, where there were so many jobs and people were getting union benefits, and there was so much economic growth, and there were 2 million people in Detroit. So why have you stayed in this same little inner city apartment for a half century, and what has that meant to making your life more fulfilling and more meaningful?
I lived in the same house for nearly 60 years. I live on the downstairs. The upstairs is the headquarters for the Boggs Center. Across the street is the abandoned house. Next door is a house that was, the fire engines came one night because a homeless person was camping out there and created a fire, and the fire hoses demolished the house. It isn't very pleasant to look at, and I don't go out very often because I'm not very steady on my feet. But young people are coming to Detroit because a new dream is being created there. It's not only that filmmakers and reporters come from all over the world and all over the country to watch a new world being brought into being, but young people are coming to Detroit because they know that they can be part of the creation of a new world. And so creating a new dream is a way to give young people something to struggle for. And we experience that every day in Detroit. You'd be amazed the number of people who come to visit the Boggs Center. Because they say, if you're rebuilding and you're redefining and you're re-experiencing the world, which is what the world needs, we want to be a part of it. So, I mean, I would prefer to live in a neighborhood where all the windows were not broken and where there were not signs saying, this is an abandoned house, be careful. But I think that the people who come seeking something to struggle for are more important, and to help them understand that it's not what is physical that determines who you are, it's what's in your heart.
Grace, thank you very, very much.